I want to thank you all for coming out. We have a very distinguished panel, wonderful moderator here for this evening's conversation. My name is Furman DeBray-Bander. I am the organizer here on the MICA side of things. In a minute, I'm going to hand it off to the director of the ACLU of Maryland, who is our co-sponsor for this event. But before that happens, I'm going to introduce Abby and Maddie to talk about an event upcoming here at MICA.
Good evening, everyone. So my name is Abby Ninehouse. I am the director of the new Center for Creative Citizenship here at MICA, and we are really excited for all of our voter access initiative activities that we have planned for this semester. Our new center is really going to be focusing on community engagement in Baltimore and beyond with civic action. So we're going to be working on a lot of different events coming up. But I want to introduce you to Maddie Wolf, who is one of our amazing student leaders, to talk about what they're working on.
Hello, so I'm really just doing so I'm the president of the MICA Political Engagement Club, which is a student org on campus. Yes, it's a great time. Come to our meetings, Fridays, 4:15 p.m., starting next Friday. Anyways, Fox 210. But actually, though, right now what we're doing is we have two amazing volunteers, the voting coordinators, Nick and Yael, who are going to be, they were here earlier today, and they will continue to be there after this ends in the lobby, and they will help you get registered to vote. They can help you with getting absentee ballots, getting vote notifications about everything that you need. If you have any qualms about, oh no, voting, what am I going to do? They can help you. They're amazing. So thank you so much.
So I wanted to make sure that Maddie came up to speak about the Political Engagement Club, because really Maddie has been one of the leaders of bringing this to the MICA campus community. So kudos to Maddie in really pushing for us to be more engaged with our voter access initiative. So I want to plug really quickly our upcoming amazing celebration. We are participating in the National Voter Registration Day this coming Tuesday, September 25th. It's going to be an amazing party and celebration of all things voting. It's a great place for people to get registered to vote and sign on to our Turbo Vote platform so you can be notified of all the upcoming elections, regardless of what state you're voting in. And so come visit us at Cohen Plaza. We'll have a satellite location in Lazarus, but we're going to be having a photo booth and pizza and just really trying to get everyone to remember to vote for the midterm election coming up on November 6th. So thank you all very much.
Good evening and welcome. Welcome to tonight's important discussion about women's rights in the age of gender inequity, Me Too, and Trump. Or as I like to call him affectionately, 45. The ACLU of Maryland is dedicated to gender justice. For us, this means working toward a state where women and girls have equal access to employment, to health, to housing, and reproductive freedom. Tonight's discussion will be intersectional, tying together threads that impact the rights of women, all women, Indigenous women, Black women, Latinos, Asian and biracial women, lesbian and transgender women, immigrant women, and so many more of us. Women in our country move through their lives with different identities. These identities can impact how women experience issues of sexual harassment and how they are impacted by sexualized government oppression. From limits to their freedom, to abortion, to restrictions on their access to menstrual products while they're in prison. Under Trump, threats to women's rights have increased. His pattern of degrading women sets a low bar for the treatment of women across the country. The movement to defund Planned Parenthood has gained steam, and continuing, sadly, Black girls are being pushed out of schools and right into the justice system at a much higher rate than white girls of the same situation because of zero tolerance policies. And we're increasingly seeing judicial threats to abortion access. On the local level, all of us, myself, you, our participants, and as we learned from Maddie and Abby, we have the opportunity to make a real difference on these and so many other issues. Key decisions are made at the state and local levels. If I weren't already registered, and if I were a student here at MICA, I would definitely be showing up on the 25th to register again and get whatever treats Maddie's handing out. And the decisions that we made at the state and local level have a national impact. Be sure you're registered to vote in Maryland. College students, as you've already heard, can register and make an impact. You have the power to demand that the candidates for public office commit to protect our democracy, end discrimination, and expand our rights. I'll end with a quote from a national, but particularly a Maryland shero, Harriet Tubman, who reminds us that we must always keep focused. As she said, every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember, you have the power within you, the strength, the patience, the passion to reach for the stars and change the world. Thank you so much, and thank you for your support this evening. I'll turn it over to our moderator.
Good evening. We have a great panel, and we're going to get to it, but we, like many women, once we had a job, began to add more to it. And so, in addition to their individual insights, and when we talked before, they wanted to make very clear that by the end of the evening, you understood that you had a role to play. And so as you listen to their presentations, notice that they're speaking from a very specific location and bringing the insights that come with that to the work, and it is work. You'll also notice that nobody has a job without a dash to another job. So I'm going to introduce them. You have their full bios in your program, so I won't go over that. But first we have Kolima Young, who is a filmmaker, scholar, activist, soon to be Dr. Kolima Young. who is already lecturing at Towson University. And she used to work here at MICA, if she seems familiar, a while ago. Monica Ramirez is an attorney and also the head of a nonprofit organization, the Alianza Nacional de Campesinas. And I don't know if you need an introduction to Carolee Schneemann. She is a artist, activist, wise woman. So first, Kolima Young, what will happen is that they will all speak and have images for about 10 minutes. Then we will begin a conversation that will include you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How you doing? Good. Yay. Welcome to Constitution Day. I'll try not to bore you. I would like to begin with a story. In October 2015, a viral video emerged of a 14-year-old, Dejaria Becton, being forcibly restrained by police officer Eric Casebolt in what now is commonly described as the McKinney, Texas pool party incident. Fox News' correspondent Megyn Kelly proclaimed Dejaria Becton was no saint. Kelly's statement exemplifies mass media's inability to read the Casebolt assault of Becton as gender-based violence. Noting Becton did not follow the officer's warnings, Kelly continued, "I'm sure he didn't know she was 14 at the time." I'm not going to show the video of this incident due to its violent nature. So to place this in visual context, Dejaria Becton is a Black 14-year-old with long brown hair and a thin build. In the cell phone footage, she was wearing a bright orange and red two-piece bathing suit. She wore no shoes. She was armed only with her skin, her voice, and her indignation. In contrast, Eric Casebolt, 41 years old, is a heavy-set white male police officer clad in a black police uniform. He was armed with a service revolver, a utility belt with handcuffs, and the authority to arrest, restrain, and wound those on site. In the cell phone footage, Becton is seen walking away after exchanging words with Case Bolt. Within 3 minutes after their exchange of words, Case Bolt forcibly grabbed Becton by the arm and hair and threw her to the ground. Becton cried for her mother. Case Bolt forced her face into the grass and kneeled on her exposed back. Analysis of the citizen witness cellular phone footage elicited several reactions from me. The first reaction was indignation. Then, despite already knowing the outcome of the situation, I felt abject fear for what would happen next. This feeling was followed by the recognition of how intimately and violently entwined Case Bolt and Becton's bodies appeared in the frame. I read this assault as gender-based violence. Few, if any, media outlets framed it as such. Gender-based violence refers to violence that is directed at an individual based on his or her biological sex, gender identity, or perceived adherence to socially defined norms of masculinity and femininity. It includes physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, threats, coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, and economic deprivation, whether occurring in public or in private life. What I would like for us to focus on tonight is the way gender-based violence is problematically read and received in public discourse. There are a host of entry points to this discussion, so I would like to present 3 frameworks that contribute to our problematic reading of gender-based violence. And in my research, I've identified that language, multiplicity, and empty empathy help to obscure the way that we should read what is happening. So language. Language reflects culture, and our language reflects a culture that does not acknowledge gender-based violence. Take, for example, the phrases locker room talk or rough horseplay. For Trump and countless other men, the locker room is the place where boys can be boys. Their version of masculinity depends on swagger and aggression regardless of who is hurt. This week on CNN, Carrie Severino, a lawyer for the Judicial Crisis Network, a group that's backing Brett Kavanaugh, said Christine Blasey Ford's allegations could describe a whole range of conduct, from boorishness to rough horseplay to actual attempted rape. Why are these phrases problematic? Well, dismissing violence as play contributes to rape culture, a climate in which survivors are discouraged from coming forward and their experiences are discounted or disbelieved. Teasing out the differences between the New York Times expose on Harvey Weinstein by Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohy and the expose by Ronan Farrow for The New Yorker, Constant Grady suggests the vocabulary we have for gender-based violence tends to be either clinical but vague or graphic but specific. It's hard to talk about sexual violence without trivializing it, obfuscating the systems that enable it, or spectacularizing it. The less specific the language, the more invisible the violence. Example, he touched her genitals. The more specific the language, the more sensationalized the language can appear. He grabbed her genitals. A survivor reading that could easily be triggered. Imagine reading the second or hearing that second phrase repeated continually for the last 2 years. Many of us survivors have. The question becomes, how do we write, research, and create art about gender-based violence in a way that captures the weight without creating more harm? The second thing I've identified is multiplicity. Me Too was the culmination of decades of advocacy. The wave of Me Too allegations in the last year and a half and the varying rigor with which they've been reported have prompted discourse about the lines between date rape and bad sex, between emotional abuse and megalomania. These conversations are difficult, but they ultimately strengthen the movement instead of diminishing it. While the conversations we are having can leave us with more questions than answers, it still makes us think more about our behaviors and previously accepted power dynamics, not less. Gender-based violence happens to a broad swath of the population. Depending on where you're situated, the backlash is fast and furious. When Terry Crews added his voice to the Me Too movement, he was immediately criticized by other Black men like 50 Cent, who dismissed the ability to claim victimhood status. Shouldn't it be the job of cultural producers, the artists, the thinkers, the activists, to readily create the containers where a multiplicity of engagements can occur? One of the ways we must broaden this discussion is by being able to better recognize the call out and call out the tactics of those who have been accused. Darvo refers to a reaction perpetuators may display in response to being held accountable for their behavior. DARVO stands for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. The offender may deny the behavior, attack the individual doing the confronting, and reverse the roles of victim and offender such that the offender assumes the victim role and turns the actual victim or whistleblower into an alleged offender. We've been seeing this happen readily for the last 2 years. This occurs, for instance, when a guilty perpetrator assumes the role of the falsely accused and attacks the accuser's credibility and blames the accuser of being the perpetrator of a false accusation. So then the question becomes, how do we allow space for a multiplicity of stories? And what methods can we use as cultural producers to call these faulty rebuttals to question? Finally, the third thing I've identified that I'd like us to engage with today is the idea of empty empathy. Let's go back to the misreading of Dejaria Becton's assault by Eric Casebolt. We misread this narrative because we live in a society of spectacle where media consumption, media convergence, and the primacy of visual communication intersect. We make what we see, we believe what we see, and truth is overshadowed by dominant media narratives. In The Suffering Will Not Be Televised, Rebecca Wanzo traces the invisibility of Black women's suffering to illustrate the way Black women's pain, wounding, and death have been excluded from media narratives about social violence and victimization. Black women have been denied the ability to tap into what Wanzo calls sentimental political storytelling, the narrativization of sympathy for the purposes of political mobilization. Sentimental stories are texts that represent history, events, people, and/or conflicts in simplistic emotional binaries. They're designed to produce tears of joy and wistfulness in the consumer and represent the emotion in a way that's far from the complexity of how affect works in reality. So Black women, even young Black girls, are not afforded the purity of victimhood that garners sentimental readings of their pain. Sometimes the sentimental can be used to push for justice and for the formation of new campaigns, like Say Her Name. But sometimes sentimental narratives lead to an overabundance of cartoon villains, cartoon victims, cartoon justice, and empty empathy. Right on, yeah, okay. Empty empathy occurs when we are invited to empathize with individuals who experience trauma without being provided the larger context for the existence of their trauma. We get empathy that's empty. In a society of spectacle, we tend to read stories of gender-based violence as singular episodes rather than evidence of systemic oppression. But context matters now more than ever. So the final question I want us to think about is, how can artists, thinkers, and activists make work that provides socio-historical context for gender-based violence? We are desperate and it is needed. Thank you.
Wow, let's give her another round of applause. So my name is Monica Ramirez, and I'm the co-founder of Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, which is the first and only national farmworker women's organization. And for me, whenever I speak in any place where I'm speaking across the country, it's really important to make sure that I bring into the space farmworker women, the women who I serve, and the women from whom I come. I come from a migrant farmworker family, and my family used to travel around the United States picking the fruits and vegetables that we eat, just like the 700,000 farmworker women across this country continue to do every day. And what we know about the existence and experiences of farm workers in this country, and the farmworker women specifically, is that many of the problems that farmworker women faced years ago, when my grandmother worked in the field, when my mother worked in the field, those problems still continue. And part of the reason that those problems continue is because farm workers have been largely excluded from the legal protections that exist in this country. And when we think about the exclusion of protections for individuals like the woman who you see on the slide, we have to ask why. Why are some workers valued enough to be protected by the law and other workers not? For example, farm workers still today aren't covered to receive overtime in this country. Farm worker women who are living and working in areas where they're producing on small farms aren't protected if they're the victims of sexual violence at work, if they work in a place that has fewer than 15 employees. Like many other workers who work in small places, there's no protection under the federal law for individuals who experience that harm against them. There's still today young children as of the age of 12 working in the fields legally. Farm workers in this nation are the youngest child workers in our country. Why is that? There are children who are working in the fields alongside their parents and still today being sprayed with toxic chemicals, being forced to work under dangerous conditions and not being given the implements that they need to be able to work safely, to eat the food that we eat. And so if you're a worker, like the workers who I've represented around the country, and you have fewer legal protections, fewer rights under the laws of this country, what expectation of care can you expect in your workplace? What expectation of respect and being treated with dignity can you expect in your workplace? And what I know, and what many women across this country know who work in the fields, is that their suffering is great, and their suffering is continuing. And every day we consume, and probably very few times do we think about the suffering of those who bring the food to our tables. I'm proud to be part of a movement that's fighting for individuals across our country, like farm worker women, who deserve rights and protections, whose work is dignified, whose work is valued, whose work deserves the same protections as any other worker. You know, there are 90% of farm worker women who've been interviewed as a part of a poll on the extent of sexual harassment who indicated that sexual harassment was a major problem for them. In 2014, another study was done, and 8 out of 10 women who participated in that study said that sexual harassment was a major problem for them. Sexual harassment is so rampant in the fields across our country that the fields have been called the fields of panties and the green motel. And farm worker women talk about the fact that sexual harassment and violence against them is so common that they thought it to be a term and condition of their employment. Whose bodies deserve protection? There are individuals who employ these women who believe that the women themselves, not just their labor, but the women themselves belong to them, and that they can be treated however they want to. And they're validated in some ways because they're not provided with the legal protections as every other worker across our country. And we as a movement now for more than 3 decades, have been fighting for the dignity and rights of farm worker women. And farm worker women have been rising up without protections, without money, without resources, to say that our lives matter too. Our bodies belong to us. We deserve safety, we deserve care, and we don't want the violence that we've experienced to happen to anyone else. And so we've marched, and we've brought cases, and we've brought complaints, and we've pushed for changes in the law. And every single woman who I've ever represented talks to me about the fact that the justice they are seeking is not justice for themselves. The justice that they are seeking is justice for all of those who work with them, for their daughters, and for all of those who will come after them. Farm worker women earn $11,000 on average a year. More than half of the farm workers in this nation are undocumented. Coming forward, marching, bringing cases, bringing complaints, there are real risks for those women who are speaking out, but they're bravely speaking out because they know that their bodies are theirs and the harm against them is wrong. And they too deserve justice. In our movement, we've not only fought for the rights of farm worker women, we've fought for the rights of other women workers as well. Because we know that no one deserves to be victimized, not in the workplace, not in the home, and not in the community. And so we've been organizing with other women workers too, like hotel workers and janitors. And most recently, we came into, the public spotlight because I wrote a letter that is now referred to as the Dear Sisters letter. The letter was published in Time magazine last November after Tarana Burke inspired the world to speak out about the violence that people were suffering. And women in the entertainment industry began to talk about the harm that they suffered. And farm worker women decided that we should stand with the women in entertainment and we should speak out on their behalf because we didn't want them to be silenced and we didn't want them to be harmed. And so this letter was published in Time magazine that went viral and sparked what is today known as the Time's Up movement. And as a result of that letter and a result of this Time's Up movement, we're in a very different place than we were a year ago. And the reason that we're in a very different place than we were a year ago is we have some of the least visible women workers in this country and some of the most visible women workers in this country who have come together in solidarity to say that no one deserves to be victimized and that all of us deserve equality. We all deserve safe workplaces, and we all deserve to be in conditions where we can thrive. And that has been an extremely monumental victory, in my opinion, to see women workers across the nation in all sectors, tech, law, hospitality, you name the industry, and you have seen women rising around the country to say, this isn't okay. It's happening to us, and it isn't okay, and we stand with you, and you stand for us. And so today, part of what I want to talk about is how do we leverage the momentum that we've seen growing over the past year? How do we take this movement moment that we have all witnessed unfold and turn that into lasting change? How do we ensure that there is, in fact, culture shift? And how do we, those of us who work in different disciplines, those of us who have different skills and talents, how do we bring our skills and talents to bear as artivists, as lawyers, as social workers, as counselors, as organizers? How are we collectively using those talents to change the world for the better for all of us? It's a question, but it's also a challenge. Thank you.
I'll take that one, thank you. Thanks, okay. Whoops. Lila, they're going away. Okay. I'm Carolee Schneemann, and I'm honored to be participating with this remarkable transgressive, transformative group of activist women. It's a great privilege for me as an activist artist working in the thresholds of the fragile and persistent issues of being a creative and solitary worker. I'm going to just show images that indicate the position and the resistance that I encountered originally as a painter, being told that I had no authority, and as a young girl I was anomalous, trying to insist on being available to cultural history. There was no possibility that I could ever influence it or be transformative to it. I was conceived here in Baltimore. I think that's funny, because here we all are. My dad was a medical student on fellowship, and my mom had just graduated from high school and was pregnant, and there are photographs of her looking utterly pitiful in a nurse's uniform that my dad dressed her in so that they could continue to live together. So while I had this very countrified, radical medical environment to grow up in, with my first really interesting book being Gray's Anatomy that I was welcome to pursue, I was not permitted to go to college. That was not useful for a young woman. By the time I got to New York City, with a series of miracles that enabled me to go to college with a full scholarship, room, board, tuition, and I began working against the conventions of physicality that I had inherited. As a kid, I was always bewildered by the possessiveness of men on their wife's tummy, like young pregnant women, and the men that I watched them, they would come and pat their stomach like, it's mine, it's mine. And growing up in the countryside, my first boyfriend, Bert, patted my skirt on the bus and said, when we grow up, will you breed my babies? I said, oh crap, I'm supposed to be a kind of a cow. And yes, that was the intention in keeping me from self-determination. So these images are all about self-determination. I'm taking the issue of the history of representation of the female nude and its obsessive persistence in Western culture, and proposing for myself a sequence of photographic events in which I integrate my body as part of my own painting constructions. It's called I Body. It's 1963. It's a sequence of 36 images in which I'm entranced. It's not posing. I'm moving with all the materials that surround me, that I'm building with. The paradox will be that the nude is going to dominate the constructed work. I never expect that. I think that I'm really going to become an integrated form as image, an image maker. But it will take 30 years before viewers in the art world stop telling me this is just crap. If you want to paint, paint. The other area that I want to address purely in the 60s as an experiment is the lived erotic, and I have to say it's what is it, normative, it's what is it? Yes, it's normative sexual, hetero, thank you, that's it, it's just so simple, yeah. But now it's changing, so I have to give a qualification. And I'm sorry, I always infuriate my gay students, but that's just how it was. But it was a brave attempt in 1964 to borrow Bolexes. That's a wind-up 16 millimeter camera that only runs for 30 seconds. So that 30 seconds would determine the capture of potential erotic sublime imagery. I'm only showing one image, and of course it's a film of 20 minutes and transformative erotic depiction that's all about pleasure and equity. Also at the time it was considered that it could only be pornography or some kind of weird science. And certainly a young woman had no right to presume that she could collect and edit and present this as an aesthetic and relational subject. So Meet Joy in 1964 takes the work into another ecstatic aspect of improvisation. And again, in the early days, all my groups were not trained. They were writers, balloon salesmen, my partner, the composer James Tenney, friends, and I wanted to create an erotic activist theater arena that I called kinetic theater that would eroticize my guilty culture. That was my thought, and this work is Meet Joy that has very strict sequences, but I'm just showing one of the pleasurable painterly climaxes. At the time, all my participants are mixed gender and mixed race. That's very bewildering to the 1960s culture, but it's a time of incredible political violence in which we're able to work together. The Vietnam War is what's going to preoccupy all my work subsequently after 1964. I collect images of the destruction of the Vietnamese culture. Tenney and I hear about it from a student at the University of Illinois, where we have fellowships, his in music, mine in painting, and we've never heard of this place. And there's a young poet woman who says, well, Vietnam is where all your military focus is right now, and you're destroying our culture. And then we think, teach us what it's like. We want your music, we want your theater, we want your agriculture. And I become completely obsessed with this occluded militarism. And of course, the occluded militarism, which shapes and constructs all our cultural experiences and social histories right now, sustains itself. It's once again, obviously, a brutalist culture. We have gangsters running us more overtly than usual, although they're always there. So one of my next assaults on conventional culture is a work called Interior Scroll. It starts with a very simple little drawing of a dream where I wake up and I draw this image of a woman figure pulling a scroll, a text of information from her vagina, and reading it as interior knowledge. So the drawing remains in a cigar box for quite a long time until I'm at a festival and I'm invited to participate, and I say, I really don't have anything I want to do here. I'm in a quiet moment. And then what I call the monkey on your back says, remember that little image? If you bring it to life, if you can enact it, it will have more meaning. Well, of course, it's considered an absolute disgrace, an obscenity. And in the next, I lose a lot of teaching jobs because of it. And also support from museums. There are trustees who are interested in the photos and the painting constructions, and curators are supporting the work, and there are trustees who say, we're not giving a penny to this obscenity. This is not a real artist, this is a pornographer. But as many of you know, Interior Scroll has prevailed. It's in all these art journals and books and lessons, and it's been helpful and inspiring to women to insist on the integrity of our bodies and the integration of the complexity of our experiences, erotically and intellectually and socially. Now what? Whoop. Is that where it stops, Lila? Okay, that's it for the imagery. But I'm constantly researching male violence. I have to reposition the degree of abuse that I encounter with my students as a visiting artist, as a teacher. There's almost never a teaching sequence of painting, of sculpture, of performative principles where one of my students isn't brutally raped. And suddenly I have to have an activist empathy. How do I reintegrate my group of young men and young women? So that's something that's possible with sensitizing the group and taking absolutely the position of the abused student and giving her permission to come back to class. And in some instances, she'll come back dressed in combat boots with knives hanging on her belt and camouflage outfits, completely defensive. In other instances, in the University of Massachusetts, there's another unexpected violent rape. A guy crawls through a window with a knife and assaults my student. In this instance, I want the group that's studying performative principles to be able to help one another. And so we talk about what's possible, and I want the women to feel that they can enact aggressions of their own. I put out knives and forks and paint and different material and say, work together and consider what you'd like to do with this to express and release and codify this nightmare. And they astonish me. The girls, the women go off together and they come back in with blankets. They come in with a lot of blankets and they ignore the weapons and the tough material and they wrap each other up and they do healing, or the most tender healing, rolling and stroking and napping and holding on to one another. So that takes me to my current obsessions with the studying racism, reading incidents in the life of a slave girl, that amazing biography, Forbidden to be Written, by Harriet, Lila, what's her name? Everybody know it? Say it. Yes, Harriet Jacobs. She's locked on top of a shed for years because she's literate and attractive and can write and speak. She's more endangered of being beaten and subjected to abuse and violence, but she manages this incredible history. And I require it for all my students to understand, where are we now? Why is this still the basis of our detestation of labor? Labor is a force field which capitalism has to control as part of husbandry, as parts of female potential for generation. And my worry now is that it becomes more invisible due to the power of technology, hiding and further bringing profit to the detestation of labor. So the discussion will continue from there. Thank you. Okay.
So I don't okay, are the mics on? So the way the questioning will happen, and if you could pull up the house lights, please. Well, I'll keep talking. You'll be able to see in a minute that on either aisle there are stand mics. And you can ask questions in two different ways. We're not going to have someone running around with the mics on. I can hear that this one just came back on. You can line up on either side to ask questions, or I just realized the text number is not there. Is there a frame with the text number? Okay, so I have it here. It's 443-991-0292. 443-991-0292. And the screen I'm looking at will pull it up and we'll read. I've been warned that I won't be able to read all of them, that there'll be a storm of tweets, of text, but we'll get to as many as we can. And so for that reason, we'll try to get as many questions in as we can. Am I doing one? Yes. I'm going to put this over here so we don't get feedback. Oh, it's a different number. Okay, so use that. All right. So while people are, can we pull up some of the house lights so we don't have people stumbling in the aisles to get to the. Thank you. Hey, thanks. And while people are coming, Carolee mentioned the word authority and began to talk throughout her talk about authority. So I would like we'll call them younger women, the younger women, to talk about the authority with which you spoke and where that comes from in a society that still doesn't give women often the authority to take up space and to talk. Because one of the messages that you said you wanted people to know is that they have authority. So can you school them on when did you know you were fierce?
Hey, Monica. When you know you were fierce?
It's evolving. I found my voice for the first time when I was 14 years old. I come from a very small town, and every summer farm workers arrive in my town and fishermen. And one summer, there was a pull-out section of the newspaper that said, "Welcome back, fishermen." And I wanted to know why there wasn't a "Welcome back, farm worker" section of the newspaper. And so my dad said, "We're not sure." So I rode my bike, because I come from a very small place. I rode my bike down the street to the newspaper, and I asked why there wasn't a "Welcome back, farm worker" section of the newspaper. And from there, they gave me the authority to start writing about farm workers in my little town. So I actually started writing when I was 14 for the area newspaper, and I had my own beat. It was called The Voice of the People, which at 14, I'm not quite sure if I was the voice of the people. I say that because that's really when I started as an activist. But I actually think that in the past year, I have really been coming into my voice truly. And I was at a meeting recently with some other activists, and we're talking about sort of what we've seen in the past year since the Me Too breakthrough moment happened, and as our work has been developing around this cross-sector movement building. And what I said in the meeting was what I really feel right now that relates to this question of fierceness, which is, why is it that for so long we've been asking for changes, we've been asking for better laws, we've been asking for the opportunity to defend ourselves? And I feel like finally we're at this point in time where we're just not gonna ask anymore. We're going to tell. And we're gonna do everything that we can within our power to actually make that happen. And we're seeing that. We're seeing more women running for office. We're seeing, more people walking out of places. We're seeing more people come forward to talk about some of the worst things that have ever happened to them in their lives. And it's because I think that we, and myself included, have finally reached a point where we've said we've done enough asking. And now we're just going to do it. And so I think it's been kind of started when I was 14, but I think maybe now I'm a couple years older, and I feel like now maybe I'm coming into that voice truly.
Great.
My mom used to say that I came out of the womb with my fists like this. I was always calling everything to question ever since I was a little girl. But I remember distinctly being very young, I think maybe kindergarten or so, and actually paying attention to gendered power dynamics at an early age? Why were certain boys allowed to play the drum in our little fake drum thing that we did, you know, with the triangle? Yeah. And how come the girls had to get the triangle? This is not cool. So I called that to question. Like, this is not kind of cool. And I went to my kindergarten teacher, Miss Buckley. I remember her. She had a problem. And I was just like, Miss Buckley, how come I can't have the drum? And she was just like, little girls play the triangle and they play the little flute. And I was like, So I saw this dude. There was a young fella in my in kindergarten, Eric, and he was always trying to hang out with me, you know. He was always trying to hang out, and near nap time, he wanted to be like hanging out near nap time. And I was just like, Eric, I will let you hang out with me at nap time for 2 days if I can have the drum. And he said, yeah, okay. And I got the drum, and I let him hang out with me. You know, we had the juice box situation, you know. And then after 2 days, he wanted to hang out, and I was just like, yo, it's up, time's up.
That's right.
The contract is ended. So, and I tell that story, and it's a true story, I'm not joking, to say that growing up as a young girl in a household with a single mother in a home of single mothers who had men that came in and out for various reasons, work, unsteady work, sometimes incarceration, I found myself very early on paying attention to the traumas that women were holding and the dynamics that were occurring and the dynamics they were passing down to us, or the lessons they were trying to pass down to us about how to operate in the world to keep ourselves safe. And so I really started paying attention to those things as a young person, as a little girl. And when what really prompted me to actual activism actually wasn't around gendered violence, it was actually around homelessness. I saw that there was this whole entire burgeoning, a whole lot of homelessness, lots of people without homes. When I was about 8 years old, and I went to my mom, and I was just like, there are people who don't have places to live. What am I supposed to do? And her question was always, well, go and look it up. She was always pushing me to see the context, find out why, and find out what I can do. So I started looking up and trying to find out why and what I could do, and I found out there was this thing happening called Hands Across America, and I was like, oh my goodness, I've got to sign our entire apartment complex up to be a part of this. And that was my first little activist-y campaign when I was 8. But it was really because my mom said, and every time I came to her sense, when I was a child, she would say, look it up. If you don't like it, figure out something to do.
Yeah, thanks. I have 2 questions for Carolee.
Yeah.
First, do you think that we have come any further in terms of our interpretation of images of women from when you were working?
I'll answer that before the second question.
Oh, do you want to answer the?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, given 1,000 years of patriarchal suppression, we've come a long way. Simply changing the conventions of language when you had to be Mrs. or Miss. Remember what an outrage people had about Ms.? That's meaningless. How dare you? What are you trying to do? Bunch of stupid bitches. But we're all Ms. now. So that was a major change. And of course, language for me made me crazy once I was able to get to libraries and study. Everything was masculine. The artist and his tools, the artist and his model, God and his wisdom, everything was masculine. So my first basic intellectual audacity was to take it all back and make it all feminine. And I'd go through museums, particularly in Egyptian and African collections. When I got to the Brooklyn Museum, I saw that they had deformed every attribute that I saw was female, feminine, and probably, why not, created by women. So I established my own radical art history, and I maintain it now. And strangely enough, a lot of it's being supported finally. So the transformation in the 70s that admitted this incredible, first there was separatism. We had to get away from the men we worked with, our collaborators. And that was really painful in the 70s and difficult because we thought we needed them to help clarify our situation. And then we realized we can't do that. And it was harsh. We had to form our own galleries, our own magazines, our own radical petitions, and our own struggle within the suppressive militaristic government. So yes, here we are discussing all this. It's great.
Okay. Did you want to answer the first question? I think you told
Was
us
that the
where you
first
got.
one?
Well, the second. It was the second, but do you want to? I think you've already talked about where your authority comes from. Did you?
Oh, the authority. It's just something stubborn, like you guys. You know, it's really inexplicable, because what I learned was that. Well, I like to tell the story when I was painting in my bedroom, and my mom had already told me I was not a proper daughter, and I'm the eldest. I was responsible for sharing and taking care of everything that was her problem. And she was very disappointed and perplexed, and she sent my dad in to talk to me, and I was painting a watermelon, and my supportive, interesting dad opened the door, looked at me, and said, "Drop the brush!" So I got it. Okay, the rest of my life is going to be, you better fucking drop the brush. You have no authority. But I take it. I'll make it. I'm still holding the brush.
So we've got people who've been standing very patiently. Thank you. So we start with you. Are the mics on? While they're doing that, can you check and see if yours is on? It is, okay.
Oh, here we go. Hello.
Hi.
So my question actually is kind of directed towards Kolima Young. First of all, hey, to you. I graduated from Towson class of 2016. But you talked mainly, I want to direct my question towards you because you actually talked about gender. And I guess this Me Too movement is great, and I think that women's voices being uplifted is beautiful, but I feel like there's a certain population that is being left out, and that's trans women. And I feel like a lot of times we put them in a description and we say they're being included, but they're not actually visible. And I think what sometimes needs to be said is, how do we get cis women to understand that they have this privilege of being cis women to actually go and bring these trans women into these conversations? Because trans women are being raped and murdered every day for literally just living in their authentic self. And so I feel like they kind of, to a certain extent, need to be told that they're allowed to be in this conversation, because a lot of times every day just living their everyday life, they're told that they can't be in that conversation. So I guess my question is, how do we get it out there? And even, I don't even know if mainstream or just locally, but letting them know that they're allowed to be in this conversation and that they are seen as women. And I think that's where the downfall is, of them being different. So it's just kind of like, personally, I think, how do we get cis women to understand their cis privilege and bring these women into this conversation so that their voices can also be heard and that they can be uplifted and given the same rights as women, and then also give the equal rights as men and everybody. So yeah.
That's wow. Okay. I think one of the most important things we can always do is understand our own locations when we're in activism. So every activist, no matter where you are located, needs to find out where they're socially located. Mm-hmm. What power they actually have within themselves to do the work. So that's the first thing. And then realize that you don't have the power to answer everything and address every issue. That means you need to go outside of your neighborhood and outside of yourself to find someone else to bring in their particular perspective. I think one of the things that we have to do to broaden the conversation is to not speak for other people.
That's right.
So we create platforms where everyone, we work with folks to create the platforms, and then we allow people to tell their own stories. And I think one of the things that happens is that when we talk about gender-based violence, when we talk about these kinds of violences, we have the tendency to create our own narrative around who those bodies are, what those bodies are. And I think that it's important that if we are building a platform, that we build with folks who are not situated in our same social location, right? How we do that, I do not know. But I do know that cis women with privilege do not have the authority to speak about the experiences of trans women.
That's right.
And that's the first thing. We don't own the narrative. We don't have the right to the narrative. So build your coalition with the people you're bringing in and figure out where you're coming from. Other than that, I kind of don't know, because we've been trying to figure this out for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
I'd like to speak to that as well, because this is actually something we've talked a lot about over the past 9 months, as it relates also with Time's Up. And, you know, I think that to your point about building the coalition and figuring out who you're sharing space with, there have to be some agreements about how you're going to be doing the work. And so, for example, when the 9 of us activists went to the Golden Globes, you know, that was an action. We didn't just go to a fancy party. That was a planned action on the red carpet. And there was an agreement that literally the actresses who took us to the Golden Globes, they were passing the mic. They passed the mic because the voices that needed to be heard at that moment in time, they were not their voices. They were the voices of people who represented communities like mine, the farm worker community. But at the same time, the agreement had to follow through past that, right? And so, for example, after our letter went viral and after I went to the Golden Globes, I was literally getting media calls from all around the world. And it got to the point where I stopped taking media requests because there were just too many and I had a lot of other work to do and I couldn't be talking to the media all the time. So I started setting rules. And one of the rules that I set was that I would not take an interview if they did not agree to talk to other people. And I would tell them who they needed to talk to as well. So it wasn't enough for them to interview me to hear about the experiences of farm worker women, but they had to speak with other people. And that was a term of the agreement in order to be able to participate. And that has been part of the conversation around how do we bring our trans sisters into the conversation too, and not, as you say, speak for them. It's not, we are the only experts on our lives.
Exactly.
And so if we have other people who have learned about our lives in some way talking for us, then that diminishes our voices, and also we fail to recognize the true strength and authority the individuals hold about their own experiences. And so I think as activists, it is our responsibility to make those agreements to pass the mic. Whether we're famous or not, we have an obligation to pass the mic and not speak on issues that don't pertain to us specifically.
Yeah, I have a thought also. I have a more humble proposition that deals with friends of mine who have no platform and have no community around them, and also for my students who are just emerging with so many impulses and not feeling that there is a realm open to them. And my sense of it is that you don't have to assume power at all. Do whatever small thing is possible. If you can start a vegetable garden in the corner plot, if you can help assist the animal rescue shelter in your little town. It can be very small when you begin, because no one is reaching out overtly to help us, or we can see the huge issues, and it's like trying to go to Wilmington, North Carolina, and help drowning people when you're sitting in your comfortable chair looking out the window. So we have to try to do whatever small thing is really available so that we're not overwhelmed with the impossibility of the structure around us.
And I think the message that little Kalima and Monica both said is that to negotiate. I mean, from your position, to pull in other energy by negotiating. I mean, you both talked about that. And if little Kalima can do it, we all can do it. Yes.
So first, thank you. It's so beautiful and empowering to see you on that stage, to see the different class and all the different races. I just want to acknowledge that. So my question built a little bit on what Sister was asking. So, the feminist movement was a white woman's feminist movement, right? So what does feminism look like now in 2018? And what's the role of white women in this idea of intersectionality and feminism?
And we also had a text that asked about women of color and their role right now in continuing the movement. So if we can combine those two, since they're so similar.
I have a lot of thoughts about that one. So first, I think that we have to acknowledge that women of color have been carrying these movements on our backs for a long time, with no resources. Tarana Burke created her movement in 2006. Our movement was created, as I said, 30 years ago, and specifically the work that we've been doing with Alianza in 2011 with no resources. And there are other groups like ours that have been carrying this work. And so women of color are leading. And women of color are helping to shape these movements. And people sometimes say to me, women of color are being left behind. And I say, no, the women of color are actually the ones who are creating the strategy behind some of the most important social movements of our time. So there's that. The question about feminism, it's interesting because I think for some women of color, we didn't necessarily consider ourselves feminists because we didn't see ourselves in the feminist movement. And so now when I'm in spaces with people talking about how we're organizing around the issues that we're working on, we don't actually use the terminology feminism. We talk about women-led initiatives, women's power building, right? If you look at the Women's March organizers do not refer to the march as a feminist march. It's a women's-led march. And so I think that there are still a lot of conversations that have to be had about feminism and whether reframing feminism to include women of color and how we see our leadership and how we see our role in this space. Those are conversations that need to happen. I also think, frankly, that because sometimes in movement spaces, it's really hard to make space for new people. And so sometimes people think about what was created 40 years ago or 50 years ago or however many years ago, and that is the foundation and it can't change. And so I think in the movement space, we have to challenge ourselves to be open to new ways of thinking, to new leadership, and to redefining what was maybe the principle at the beginning that now looks very different. Because what we know from women of color, like myself and others, we didn't see ourselves in that movement. And if we have a growing number of women of color in this country, which we do, and if we really believe that it is women who will change the world, which we know, then we need to make sure that the movements that are supposed to be supporting us and representing us actually look like us and reflect back the ideals that we hold.
I completely agree and I totally agree. And I also want to add, just as an addition, that when we have these conversations about feminism, and we have these conversations about what the movement looks like, and in any activist social justice movement, that we begin to cite the women and the work that we build on. I am so tired, just anecdotally, of hearing the phrase intersectionality being spoken by people who don't understand the origin story of that concept and how it's changed. So I think one of the ways that we can do better work as women-led organizations, women organizers, folks who are organizing around gender, is to actually understand the theories and the structures that were created, where they come from, who said it. Don't you quote Audre Lorde out your mouth if you don't know her whole entire story. Don't just randomly throw out bell hooks and not know where bell hooks was building off of. Right? So I don't know, is this the teacher in me that's all about context? I guess it is. But I think that if we're gonna do this movement building, we need to not just understand the surface of the theory that we are using, understand its origin story, understand where it's problematized and how it's continuing to be problematized, and cite people when you do your work. Cite Black women. That's my feeling.
My issue to support that is that it's our responsibility to teach this history, to not let it get swamped away, that black people built this goddamn culture. And that has to be part of our history. The University of Texas has just taken away cultural history of feminist studies. That's a place where academics go and fight for this and put all our muscle in it, male or female, and we've got to establish a truer history here. This is an assassination culture, and we live in the privilege of what survives it.
I've got to quote that.
And just so people know that they were heard, we had a couple of texts asking about the relationship between theory and action, which I think you're beginning to dig into, if you wanted to add any more about that, how to move. I think you just demonstrated, all of you, how you're moving through theory and action and exercise. I'll use the word exercising praxis, but
Yeah.
so that people feel their questions are addressed. Did you want to add any more?
Oh, I just wanted to say that the two houses are, the house of activism and the house of theory. We like to make this conversation that academia and activism are separate, but we all know that that's not the case, right? And I think one of the things that we have to address, especially in spaces of academia, is the siloed nature of those platforms and the siloed nature of the conversations that happen. And also in activist circles, the siloed natures that happen in activist circles. And one thing that's I've been thinking about a lot as an academic who likes to do activisty stuff is the privileges that I have currently as an academic. So I have access to journals that certain activists might need. Give out your email and your password so that people can get the journal entries that they need to do the activisty building, right? You have a space here in MICA's campus. Use some of these rooms and bring in activists and let them use those resources, right? So to understand where we have resources in academia that we can share and get out of the silo, and that activists have resources too, and that they're not, and they are not mutually exclusive.
I said I was going to call on you 10 minutes ago. Yes.
First of all, good evening. Very good presentation. Tomorrow is the national debut of the movie Fahrenheit 119 with Michael Moore, and he always does a very good job, like he did with Fahrenheit 9/11. So two-part question. Do you plan to see the film, unless you already saw it in preview? And number two, if you have the opportunity, if you so choose, and if you're able to be the current First Lady, what message can you pass on to her, to tell her, to pass on to somebody else, that the Blue Wave Revolution is coming on November 6th of 2016? Thank you.
You mean besides run? Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be moderating here. Sorry. Well, you have any words for okay.
I'll plead the fifth. 4, 5, 5, 5th. Who's got thoughts?
I'd like to see the movie.
Well, and Michael Moore has talked about how he's unleashing humor in this era, and so that's an important vehicle. Yes.
Okay, so I have a question, and I want to partially answer the question too, even though I want to know your response first. If that makes sense. So I'm very challenged by this idea, very challenged and stimulated by this idea of identifying the historical context of gender-based violence. Okay, so I ask myself, my question is, where in the world would you start, since I can't even think back to a time historically when this wasn't the case, right? But my comment about, and I do want to know your thoughts about that, but what I'm hearing already is that these questions or these issues of dominance are already changing, obviously. We're talking about how we relate to this problem, interracial, blacks and whites, and transgender and not, and we're already sort of crossing these boundaries and becoming one, let's say, despite the fact that there's continual dominance and there's a need to confront dominance.
Do you have a question?
What I'm getting at is that I think human nature seeks dominance and seeks submissiveness. I think this is part of human nature, and if we try to go back to when this started, I think we have to take a humanist approach to the problem and include men. In other words, I'm kind of obsessed with this idea that human nature, the duality of human nature, is going to rear its ugly head at some point, all the time.
So can you give them something to respond to?
Yeah, so I'm asking, where do you start with the question that you raised for, let's say, artists to place their work in context, in this context? What's the question that you would ask or where would you look to be educated, to educate yourself?
Can you sum up her question? I'm lost.
Does that make sense? Am I making any sense?
She's asked if we can sum up the question, but do you want to do that as you understand it?
Yeah, so are you talking about my call that we make sure that we pay attention to the socio-historical and contexts of the situations we're talking about?
Yeah, I'm saying you raised a really inspiring question. I think that's great for artists to think about that. I don't know, I wouldn't even know where to start, because I think
the first place you start is to realize that nothing is new.
Mm-hmm.
That the way certain things manifest because systems were created. Nothing pops out of the sky. It's like when my students, we start talking about capitalism, and I'm just like, we can rethink that whole capitalism idea. And sometimes, and this is in a film class, and sometimes the students are like, but how? And I'm like, anything that was created can be uncreated, right? Like capitalism didn't come out of the sky. There were a set of socio-historical things and happenings that occurred that we are now in a capitalist space. So to start understanding that there are origin stories to every single incident that you see. So when you're watching something, you're like, I want to make some art about this particular viral video that I just saw. Well, actually understand about the context. Who is that person that you want to make this art about? How did they get to that exact space? What's the nature of the city that they're living in? What are the rules and housing issues that have been going on in the city? Where are the issues that relate to racism or redlining that created that they're in this situation that the law enforcement officer is about to kill them, and we have this on tape? Where did that cell phone come from, and where did that person live? So you have to not just be inspired by the empathetic spectacle that has made you decide to make art about something. You actually have to look at the person as a human and then look around and figure out how they got to that place and how the conditions were created that they were on the other side of that policeman's gun. And that's where you start. It's not about how I feel, and this has provoked me to make want art about this thing. It's about, where's the full humanity of this person? Let me investigate that, and then from that, you start finding the socio-historical context that put them in that place, and you start identifying why you're empathizing with that body that you want to make art about. So I reckon that's a loose way that you could do it.
A couple of questions that we've had tie into something else that was just mentioned as you talk about the binary, is that the role of people who identify as men. And since the sexual terrain has become more expansive, this person kind of said, you're probably going to skip over my question, so of course I'm not going to skip over your question. With the BDSM community and abuse within the BDSM community when power is being played with and expressed in different ways. So that idea of the old dichotomies are starting to fall away, and what challenges does that present? Did I not?
Yeah.
I thought I heard protest. Did I not say your question? Okay.
So in communities of play, like communities of sexual play where incidents of rape occur or racialized
Or
violence?
submissiveness that, I mean, there's no line necessarily. I mean, different cultures have different communities have different lines,
Yeah.
but the old rules don't apply anymore. And so what challenges does that present?
Several. I think about language, right? I think about if a part of your play is language, calling someone out their name, right? If a part of your BDSM play is using a racial slur against your partner or a transphobic slur against your partner, and that's a part of your play, well, someone could be having a bad day that day. Every day and every interaction is an opportunity to rewrite the rules and find out where people are. I think every community, and I hope this, but it's really about ongoing conversation and consent. Because the rules can change from minute to minute and day to day. So if you are partnering with somebody and there was a particular way that you interacted with each other on Saturday, something could change on Sunday. You need to check in. It's like the conversation of enthusiastic consent between two people trying to have sex, right? You might have had sex last week, but they don't want to have sex on Thursday, or they want to have sex an hour later after they had sex again. So in all of our interactions with one another to check power, we need enthusiastic consent at every stage. Re-question, reposition, ask again, don't make assumptions. And I feel like that works with the BDSM movement. I think that works in activist movements, feminism, academia. I don't know, while I'm getting my salad.
Yeah.
That's right. I agree.
What I would add to that, I want to add to that just research. When you are in a conundrum in your culture, something's bewildering, something's oppressing you, go to your instinctive area of research. As you say, context, build it, deepen it. It should be rigorous. You can't solve it just with your own feeling. You have to find out what is the structure that's influencing you, your dilemma, your privilege, and what undermines your own authority. And it's work, you know? That's something we can all do. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, good evening. Evelyn Reed was an anthropologist who looked at the origins of women's oppression in the total of society, and said it began with who took her cue from Frederick Engels, who took their cues from the beginning of social class. So the question is, what you consider the source of women's oppression, and how can it be resolved?
Hey, Carolee, you want to answer that?
Sure. I can answer it.
She's getting out the book.
She's getting out of
Yeah,
the book.
there's a new book that answers it. Yeah.
It's the evolution of beauty.
But it's really about how Darwin's forgotten theory of mate choice shapes the animal world and us. And it's a anthropologist and originally a bird watcher. He's just a brilliant scientist, theoretician. And one of his issues has to do with a specific process of aesthetic de-weaponization. De-weaponization is essentially the reduction of male armaments which have evolved by the process of male-to-male competition through female mate choice. But he takes it in such a lively, vivid present tense, and it helps us understand the structures around us, that the real battles, the deepest battles, are between the men who need power over goods and rights and each other. And the women have always been collateral damage or collateral investment, adornment. So I think this will be enlightening for everyone because it changes the whole history of mating and human definition of how they can mate, how they can love, how they can function together. It's another fresh kind of approach. So it's called The Evolution of Beauty, and it's by Richard Prum, P-R-U-M, not prune, but Prum. It's a Alsatian German name, so
Okay,
I like it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
When Carolee was speaking about how women had to, all this time thinking about it, how women had to cigarette themselves to gain their own artistic voice and their ability to be seen. I'm curious as to, is there an end to that? Is there a desegregation of that artistic voice via gender or?
Who wants this one?
And let me add to it, because we've had several texts about the role of men, and is there a role, and what shape should that take? And actually, if I can direct Monica, can you talk about the role, if there is one, in your movement of men?
Mm-hmm. So there's definitely a role for men. First of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that sexual violence does not only impact women. Sexual violence also impacts men. It impacts children. And we have to acknowledge that every time we talk about this. We have to talk about how we're building power and with who. When I started my work in 2003, it was organizing women in Florida. I remember that I was trying to have some organizing meetings with the women in this one community, and they were really nervous about meeting with me because they knew that if they met with me in a small group that the men in their lives were going to be angry because they were going to think that they were gossiping or that they were doing something they weren't supposed to. So it was really important to them to make sure that the men were also at the meeting so that they wouldn't get in trouble. And that's important for me to think about in terms of my work, because I want to make sure that whatever message I'm delivering is a message that's going to resonate with both women and men, because women and men are part of the solution. We've got to do it together, right? We've got to talk through what used to be acceptable, what is acceptable now, and really in my work, I do a lot of work in my community, getting people to envision what the world is what do we want the world to look like? And how are we working together to get to that place, right? So my work is not as, I'm not looking as backward in terms of the history of violence against women, because we know it's always been there. I'm really trying to figure out what do we want the world to look like and how are we gonna get there? And how are we gonna get there through organizing in our community? So in my work, it's really taken a lot to change the norms so that when we're having a meeting with women, that men know that they can come too, and they're welcome, and we're going to have a conversation about these issues, and it's going to be the same conversation if they're in the room or not, but also that women need to have their own space, and that when we're organizing, it isn't an attack on them. The work that we are doing to end gender-based violence, the work that we're doing to ensure that there's gender equity, it is not an attack on men. If women are safe at work, and women can produce at work to their full ability because they're not constantly looking over their shoulder because they're afraid that they're going to be victimized, then the women are going to be able to thrive, and our communities are going to be able to thrive, our families are going to be able to thrive. And so really it has to be seen as a mutual interest in being able to end this problem for the good of all. And I think that we have to talk about it that way, because people say to me, like, oh, your work is all about the women's movement. No, my work is about making the world better for everyone, period. And if we're gonna do that, then we need men at the table. And we need men to understand that this isn't a woman's issue, it's their issue too. And they shouldn't only care about ending sexual violence in the workplace or any other place because it impacts their mom, their sister, or their wife. They should care about it because they just should care about it. It's the right thing, and we need everybody to work on it.
And we've had a message to please continue to include non-binary and gender non-conforming people in this conversation.
Yeah.
And so while we're working with the dichotomies, we need to recognize that dichotomies are themselves I mean, I'm not talking to you, obviously, that those are manufactured in the way that Kalima was talking about, and we tend to throw people into corners. You want to say something?
Oh, I was just, for the last 5 minutes, I've just been saying, explode the binary in my brain, right? Because it's so easy for these conversations to become so rigid and to become so binary focused. And we just have to keep on working in our dialogues and in ourselves to understand that these are all constructs that we've adhered to. And like I said about capitalism, it was created, it can be uncreated. And people do, and we need to make sure that we are just continuing to explode the binary in every way that we talk about this, even though it is so very familiar and comforting to fall back into the thing that you've been trained in or moved through. So that's all.
So I want to say a minute about how we're going to manage the rest of our time so we get in as much as possible. People have been standing up a long time, so I'm going to recognize the people who are standing up now. And then I'm going to combine some of the texts that have come in, because there's some themes. And then we're going to make sure that you have last words. Is that fair? Yeah? Okay. All right. So let's bounce over to you.
Hello. Thank you so much for the beautiful conversation today. And it kind of relates to what we were just talking about. I was thinking about the terminology, feminism, because like terminology itself does not cover the concept that we're trying to break the binary gender. So I was just thinking a lot about that, because when we hear like a feminism, it sounds like it only covers the people who only defines themselves as a female gender. So I was curious about how you guys think about like what will be a possible substitution for that terminology. And the second question is like, I'm from South Korea, and my country has very a lot of binary gender and very conservative about the gender roles and the stuffs. And the concept of feminism started, the movement started, but the thing is how it started was now the concept of feminism is kind of tilted towards to a female supremacy, and it's making a lot of controversy, conflicts in my country, and a lot of people who believes in gender equality, they do not define themselves as a feminist, because the terminology, how it's used in Korea is they define themselves oh, female are better than anyone, and it's just making a lot of a conflict, and I don't know how to approach to it, because a lot of my friends who believe in gender equality, they're saying oh, I'm not a feminist, I really can't say that, because it's just I can't do that. And I was just I don't know how to handle about it. So I was just curious about how you guys would handle that situation. Ooh.
Okay.
Sure, whoever wants to.
I feel you. It's complicated. But it's always language is complicated. Language is almost designed to obscure what we really mean. And really, if we could all just touch each other and feel what we were feeling, it might be a little better, but I don't know, it still has to get filtered through us. I think that what you're bringing up is the complication of language, right? Because that has occurred across many different ways. So people hear the phrase feminism and they think female supremacy. They hear anti-male. They hear white. They hear Western, right? It's a term that needs to be exploded, right? We talk about gender, but well, we understand that gender is really a construct. So what do we call this thing? So I don't necessarily have a solution. I'm co-signing with you. But I also think that we need to remember in this, I'm just context girl, but we also need to remember that every time that we change language, we also have the tendency to flatten and invisibilize the history that created that language and the struggles that went into defining that language in the first place. So if we can find some way to develop language, or at least allow for the flexibility of words, right? In ways that do not invisibilize their origin story, that pays homage to where it comes from, but then also make it porous enough that everyone feels like they're a part of that language, then we have done the work of being good humans. Mm-hmm. I don't know how we do that. And if Mr. Rogers was here, he might be able to tell us something.
And in the history of movements, often when you have something that's been so dominant for so long, the counter movement almost has to swing really far to the extreme before it hopefully settles into a more nuanced space, just because the pool of history is so strong.
It's not a smooth process.
No,
it's
no.
conflicted, but that's the power and interest of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Yes.
Hi. I don't feel like my question is very smart, but I'm here representing a specific artistic community in Baltimore City right now that's in crisis. So my question is about backlash. And several of us are here this evening, and we are strong, but we are tired. And so several people here, and myself as well, just have experienced backlash in terms of our artistic work, our ability to work after coming forward with stories, or our allyship with survivors of violence in our community. And I basically am looking for some words of inspiration, because I know every person on the stage right now has experienced that in her life and with her work. So that's what we came tonight.
Mm-hmm. And we've had a couple of messages about backlash and how to survive it and how to get past it. So how did you do that?
I need the
backlash. How did you? You've experienced. There are people in Baltimore, artists, who have experienced backlash because of their art, and she's asking for wisdom and inspiration, because you talked about backlash and how you survived.
You
and
can't
endured.
anticipate it. It's I've had censorship from my own culture. I've had it from the CIA, from the Mossad, from the most unexpected and sinister places, but all those risks are sort of on the side of having to look at material that's taboo, that's forbidden, that it has to be looked at. And that might be a dead animal, the viscera, aspects of war. I'm surrounded right now by a plethora of mutilated, dead Syrian corpses, all men that have been starved and tortured, and they're ordinary men that were just going about their normal lives, and there's just piles of these corpses. The photographs were smuggled out at great risk to the photographer. I'm not sure if this is my next work, but it's certainly in line with the disturbing parts of destructive culture that invade me and make it impossible to continue with the pleasurable aspects that I like to work with. So it's not something I can control. It just demands attention.
Well, and something that you just said, I moderated another panel. Actually, it was just one person, it was Angela Davis, and several women asked her that same question. And her answer is very consistent with the language that I'm hearing here at MICA, which is to make sure that there's joy, and that the work is something that, even when we think of work that's highly unpleasant, that it feels meaningful and it matters to you, because this is not a short trip.
Yeah.
And so you have self-care is really, really important, and making sure that you take time to take care of you and to infuse joy into your life is how she has endured for more decades than most of you have been alive.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It reminds me of that idea of friction, right? The environmental feminist Anna Zing, she has this idea of friction. One stick just alone is just a stick. Two sticks that rub together create heat and light. In spaces where we have the most friction, we can often have the most productivity, right? So when we're experiencing these moments of backlash against the things that we hold dear, to stop and interrogate where it's productive, and then utilize that productivity and respect that productivity that comes from it, while also taking time to care for yourself. And then also, if you're doing this in a space with community and movement work, that, what is that? My wife says it all the time about, don't go into movement work expecting to find your milk, go outside of it. Something like that. I think it's Bernice Johnson Reagan or something. But this idea that sometimes even in the communities that you're organizing with, you need to step outside of those and get your milk someplace else.
And we've had a couple of questions about persisting and surviving within progressive institutions, like theaters, institutions of higher ed, where the work is, and the resistance is often more nuanced.
Creepy. Oh, I can add one thing to that. There was Rutgers University never had a woman in the art department. They just didn't, and I knew a lot of the guys there, and I was hired for what was called the Wonder Woman job, and it was atrocious because every contemporary woman artist you might have heard of in the 90s applied for the job. It was like sitting in the dentist's office. So I got the job, and I dismantled all the patriarchal traditions that my students had inherited, and it went, I thought, really well. Anyway, then after 2 years, I was taken out for drinks by my favorite colleague, and he said, well, I have harsh news for you. Your contract's not going to be renewed. I know you think you were successful, but we think you're a witch. And that was 1996. I said, Frederick, you're kidding, right? He said, no.
And Kalima mentioned Bell Hooks, and we revere Bell Hooks, but if you look at her life, I mean, she went from institution to institution, not getting tenure because of her writing.
Right.
And so that close-in work, and I want to acknowledge the person who asked the question, that close-in work costs a lot because you're right here. It's easier to lob a grenade over there but you, again, those sets of advice that you gave about joy and moving out of that space, that's particularly important when the work is close in, to move out of that space and to people who love you and take care of you, and to go away to do that.
Yeah, that's actually what I wanted to say, and I want to thank you for bringing that forward. First of all, what you do matters, and don't forget that. And we have to acknowledge that as activists, whether we're artists or whether we're doing some other kind of activism, there is pain in the work. And to pretend as though we're always standing strong in our power, and to pretend as though there's always victories that are being won, that is false. The work is often very hard, and there is often pain in the work. And so I feel that it's really important to build our tribes. And I think it's also really important to give ourselves permission to step away when we need to.
Yeah.
We don't talk enough about the violence against activists for doing our work and for being who we are. I don't talk often about my own experiences with violence, but I will here because I think it's important. I was subject to 3 death threats, and my niece was almost kidnapped because of my work.
Yeah.
There are many activists across our country who are just doing what we believe is right, what we believe will help make it better for everyone, and we're subject to violence because there are people who are afraid that we might actually succeed. And it is not wrong for us to step away and get safe. And it is not wrong for us to take a break. That doesn't make us any less effective or any weaker as activists. And so what I have to say to people who feel backlash and pain in the work, you're not alone. There are many other activists who feel that. And it's really important to know that there are other people who might not be the people in your inner circle who feel what you feel and want to support you. So build your tribe and know that there are other people who understand where you're sitting in this moment and would be supportive if you reached out.
And we did have a text asking about vulnerability, and I think you addressed that from one way. And there are several people who have suggested that the question about backlash was about how do you respond to survive from backlash about creating art. And while there are lots of answers to that, someone also texted an answer. Backlash always follows progress and is fear-driven. Know that over time we go forward. And that's not an immediate response to how do you survive in that moment, but it is a response. I'm aware that two people are still standing to speak, ask questions.
Hi everyone, my name is Brittany Oliver. I'm a person who does a lot of important work in this city. Founder of Not Without Black Women, previously with my family at the ACLU, and I'm currently with the National Organization for Women in Washington, D.C. My question, well, I have a comment and then I have a question. One thing that I want to uplift here tonight, because oftentimes when we have these conversations about Me Too and sexual violence, they're often very, like, I feel kind of down, right? Like, this stuff is hard, it's tough stuff to deal with. But what I want everyone in this room to realize is that you all have to understand Tarana Burke uplifting the work that she has done for over 10 years, and most recently got recognition for the work that she's done. And countless other women who have been doing, foot soldiers who have been doing this work. What's happening right now is a phenomenon. Like, the revolution is being televised, right? Literally. And it's because of women's work. It's because of women who have been doing this work for a long time. So although this is hard and it's painful, if there's no pain, if there's no challenges, there's no progression. And being subjected, being an activist who has been subjected to the same experiences, backlash, targeting, intimidation, all of it. The work has gotten harder over the years for me. And so, and me and a lot of other women, a lot of other folks in this room. And so that, I just wanted to like uplift that, because we're doing important work, no matter how difficult it is. And my question is, I want to go back to Dr. Kim Morgan's question about what does it look like to end women's oppression? And what comes to mind for me is locally. I've been to these types of events all over the place. We're seeing it happen right now with Dr. Ford and the Kavanaugh hearings. She's being treated like she's on trial. Anita Hill did this work already, right? And look where we are now. So what these types of conversations make me think about is how can institutions such as MICA, ACLU, and others support survivors? What does that look like locally? Because there are survivors sitting in this room right now. And so my question to the panelists are, what are some ideas that you all have, whether you live in Baltimore or not, that you think that the community writ large can assist? What kinds of what does support look like for survivors? What are some examples of what institutions can offer so that we know that we're not alone? Survivors know that they're not alone, but what is actual support? What can be offered so that we have some direction and because because we're a lot of us. Someone made a comment about being tired. You damn right. But the work is going to continue, and it's clear, especially what's happening right now, and in the conversation, in the narratives writ large, like we're not going anywhere. The work is going to continue. We are the revolution. We are creating the change right now. So how can our community, our local communities, support survivors? What are your ideas behind that?
If I can weave together some things that have been said tonight, part of the exhaustion comes from some days it feels like the work doesn't matter. And to recognize the worth of the work, and for the community around you to recognize the worth of the work is a type of support. The rest you have, the actual physical rest you have to take on for yourself. But a lot of the fatigue comes from being taken for granted, which is something women are quite used to. Particularly, I've written a lot about Black women and their activism and that sense of you're doing it by yourself and everybody lets you step up. But so the community around you. Also, we've had questions specifically about what MICA can do. And they're actually, I'm new here, and part of the reason part of my job and the job of Abby and Kevin and other people who've been hired recently is to figure out the resources that MICA brings to the table and how we can co-work, not work for, not work at, the different communities. And so, talk to us. Yeah. Did you want to add to that? I don't know what you're going to do to me. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say that finding communities or finding ways to have conversations about what community accountability looks like are really, really important. So if you have an institution that has some kind of power that can help facilitate that conversation, what does community accountability look like? What does accountability to other folks look like in the work? I think that that's one of the key things that institutions can do. There have been paradigms, there have been ways to do restorative justice, there have been ways and strategies that have existed for a very long time. I think institutions have the power to sort of bring those things together and help communities figure out accountability measures, if that is any help. Because I think a lot about it in terms of like the activist work I do with the monument quilt, and we were colleagues with that. And this idea that we always run into, yes, force, do it. And this thing that we would run into when we put the quilt's on display, what do you do when a survivor is also a perpetrator?
Yeah.
Right? When they're actually a part of your community, how do we create spaces and accountability measures and places where everyone who's been touched by gender-based violence is safe? I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that institutions that have a little bit of power, the nonprofits, the schools, the higher education institutions, can help facilitate and help organizations figure that out.
And notice that's another binary that needs to be destroyed.
Yes.
The victim and the perpetrator.
Yep.
Yes.
Speaking of community on like a much smaller level, because I'm a first grade teacher here in Baltimore City, how can we provide resources to students who are at a much younger age and their families to change the system of how things will be when they get older? I don't know if that question makes sense, but what are the resources for children and their families, and how to start this at a much smaller level instead of taking care of these things when children grow up and then they're faced with these, like they don't have platform for conversation. There's academic theories and stuff like that and how you can teach this to children, but it's also very unresearched right now, I feel, with how quick things are changing.
Do you mind if I take this?
Yeah.
Actually, there's a fair amount of research around gender and racial socialization of children. One of the strongest things you can do is to watch the media that they watch, actually watch it, pay attention to it, and counteract it, either turn it off or counter-argue it, because the strongest stereotyping that children get comes from the media that they watch, and that's one of the tools that's it's not easy because parents use TV as a babysitter or video games as a babysitter, but the adults have a great deal of power in the lives of children. There was one study where all the mother did was go, meaning that she didn't believe it, and the children, this was in a reserved situation, double mirror, and the children looked at it and then later reported that something that they had thought was true wasn't true, and all she did was grunt. And so we often abdicate that power, and after the parents, the next credible person is you.
Yeah, because there's a lot of research for sure, but it's also changing so rapidly, and there's a lot of limitations to access for parents too. I think that's readily available, especially in Baltimore. So that's something that I'm trying to figure
Well, parents
out.
often abdicate the power that they have.
Yeah.
And that's because of the stress of their lives, and so that's the conversation. A lot of, I don't want to get too academic here, but a lot of the new research really reinforces some of the old research. It's not, things like the way families move don't change nearly as much as as they seem to when you get underneath the surface. I want to make sure that our panel has time for last words.
I just wanted to say there is a new children's book out called C is for Consent, so check it out. And also, I know that there are new resources that are being developed around the conversation of the Me Too movement. The YWCA is working on some good materials that will be available. So I think there are going to be more tools available through various community organizations, like the National Sexual Violence Resource Center has also produced some tools. I can't remember the National Latina Organization Against Sexual and Domestic Violence has also created some tools. They have a video and a workbook for kids. So, and those are all nonprofit organizations. So I would check all of those resources out, and I'm happy to give you the information after. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we have 2 comments. This is an adult parental issue to work on for progress. Children have other work to do. Children can be used by adults to support the adults' issues. I think by use, they mean to cooperate. And another one, legislative session 28 made consent education now included in Maryland sex ed. Mm-hmm. So last comments?
I'm thrilled to be part of this discussion. That's my only last thought. So, yeah.
I just want to say, it's an honor to be here and grateful to be in this room with you tonight. And I'm grateful for the chance to think about how we're going to work together to make things better, because it really is going to take every single one of us in this room to make that happen. And I hope that we continue to see ourselves as partners in the work.
And I think I just want to leave with strive to leave every single interaction in the work that you do in this movement not being diminished and not having diminished someone else's truth. Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the deepest things we can do as empathetic human beings, is to see one another and understand that all of our stories are different and all of our locations are different and how we're entering movements are different, but to never leave our interactions and the work that we do with each other having been diminished or having diminished someone else.
Please join me in thanking our panel. And good night.
Good night.
Do I have somebody's pen here?
I have my pen.
Oh.